Casey than me, so I am going to let Casey come on and take over.
Like Diana said, my name is Casey Holmes, and I am the collections manager for Yesterday in Turner. I want to thank my fellow board members for sponsoring this event and for the Turner Fire Department for hosting it. We really appreciate it. I am very passionate about our subject this evening. I'm very excited to share some experience with you. Hopefully you will find it helpful, whether you came because you live in a historic house or because you just like historic houses or because you like old stuff like me. We'll talk about some of the nitty-gritty practical ways that each of us can do historic preservation. There's a lot of different ways to do preservation. And I want to begin this evening by acknowledging an important part of preservation theory, and that is that each of us has a story. Each of us has a place, or at the very least an object, that we have endowed with great meaning. Something that holds a lot of memories for you, something that matters to you. And if you're not already thinking of one, I'd like you to take a minute and just think of an object or a place that has deep personal meaning for you. Now, I believe that the meaning and the memory that we wrap up into things and places gives us very tangible access to something that makes us uniquely human. We as a species really have a unique, deep need to hold on, to remember, and to share. And that's why we want to preserve places and things. That's why we want to keep them safe, and why we feel that they are worth talking about. And when it comes to truly intimate structures, like a historic house, preserving a house doesn't just mean making sure that the foundation is sound or that all the furniture is exactly the way Aunt Pearl left it. It's about preserving the story, preserving the life, and preserving the meaning and the memories that were built in that house. Preserving the house isn't the same as preserving a Van Gogh or a Chippendale chair. For one thing, houses are much bigger. They have a lot of parts made of different materials. They are complex. They're subjected to all different agents of change, from weather, natural disasters, family growth and economic stimulations and crashes. Houses live and grow and age with us. So tonight, as I begin, I want to acknowledge that the historic house in your mind that holds a lot of memories and meaning is worth remembering. And in that way, its essence, if not its structure, because the structure will eventually crumble and fall down, its essence and its story is worth preserving. And that's going to be the main thrust of my presentation tonight. How do we preserve the thing, but also how do we preserve the story? So to start off, if you'll humor me, I'm going to take just a few minutes, like Diana said, to explain how I got into all of this historic preservation stuff. Maybe parts of my story will seem familiar to you and help you see why historic house preservation is such a unique niche of preservation theory, not just for museum professionals, but throughout American history. So just to lay the groundwork for what I'll be covering tonight, I'm going to start by explaining my background in historic house research, get into my education just a little bit because I'm a nerd and that's fun. A brief history of the preservation movement in America, where it's been and where it's going, and why historic houses are such a unique part of that movement. We'll take a look at some of the criteria for acceptance into the National Register for Historic Places for reference purposes only. I am not convinced that every historic house belongs in the National Register. That's not where I'm going to land the plane tonight. And I'm certainly not going to tell you that you need to do all of the things that this list of criteria tells you to do in order to make your house important. Because your house and your story are already important. What I am going to do is use the National Register criteria to start a conversation about prioritizing intentional care and historic integrity. If you want to do preservation carefully, then you look at other people and their example of doing preservation well. If you want to do it fast and cheap, I can tell you how to do it kind of cheap, but I will not tell you how to do it fast. Finally, we're going to talk about some of the practical resources for historic preservation that you have on your smartphone, and how Yesterday in Turner can help you on your historic house preservation journey. So real quick, this is my background. It's a lot of text. Ignore it. I have had an interest in historic houses since I was 10 years old. That's when I first started hearing stories about a big, beautiful house in the middle of nowhere, a mile away from the dairy farm where I grew up in central Illinois. It was a beautiful Georgian-style 2-story white house with giant pillars in the front and a big wraparound porch. And there were all these stories about how it was built before the Civil War. And then someone said, no, it was built before the Revolutionary War. And then they said the Prince of Wales used it as a hunting lodge. And then someone, when I was in high school, someone said, Casey, did you know that there's an underground tunnel that goes a half-mile from the basement to the railroad tracks, and they used it in the Underground Railroad? I've never been in that house. I drove by it twice a day, every day, on my way to school and back. And I've never been in that house, but that house was my first love.
Well, let's go there.
Field trip.
Then my family took a motorcycle trip to North Carolina, and we visited the Biltmore Estate. And that was such an eye-opening experience. That's when I decided to study historic preservation in college. Then after college, I visited my brother, who was a poor actor in LA, and we went to the Huntington Estate and Gardens and Library. And that's where I found my calling, connecting historic house preservation with personal libraries and archives. That's the story of how I got a passion for this subject. This is my academic street cred. Woohoo, I'm happy to talk about that some other time. But I will elaborate a little bit on my master's program, if you'll humor me, at Baylor University, because that is the main source for everything that you're going to see in this presentation, and all the books that I reference were just my reading list. So my master's at Baylor consisted of coursework in museum administration, education, and collections management, followed by a 3-part comprehensive exam and a final project. Most universities focus on one of these 3 areas. USC Chapel Hill focuses on museum education. George Washington University focuses on museum administration. And they are both great programs, but they are not as comprehensive as Baylor is. Since my degree covered all 3 areas, I took education courses. I observed educational programs in a museum setting. I even got to sit in on a preschool that was operated by the Natural History Museum of Houston, which was very expensive but very cool. I also took nonprofit management classes, a bit of accounting, volunteer management for the administration component. And when we focused on the collections management, we spent a lot of time in the lab, learning how to properly identify, catalog, and preserve objects and artifacts that would eventually go on display or into our collection storage at the Mayborn Museum complex on the Baylor campus in Waco. That's the picture on your left, my right. Every week we visited at least one museum of one kind or another. We got behind the scenes tours and interviews with all the collections managers and the directors. We visited natural history museums, the Cowgirl Museum, the Texas Football Hall of Fame, tons of art museums in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and some amazing science and industry museums. We also visited a couple zoos, because zoos are museums with live collections. My favorite museum that we visited every semester was the Perot Museum in Dallas. It's 3 stories high, super interactive, and they had a Perot After Dark program for adults only that sold out months in advance every year. It was spectacular. Our favorite class trips, though, were to historic houses. We visited houses that were already functional museums with guided tours, houses that were closed to the public but available for private tours, houses that were falling down. Those were my favorite. They said you have to wear boots for this field trip. And we would walk up half a mile through weeds and mud to get to a house or a barn that was falling down and have a discussion about how do we preserve something that isn't even safe to walk in. Now, right down the street from the Mayborn Museum complex was the Texas Collection Library, which is an archival research center. Archives focuses on the preservation of archival material. So think maps, letters, books, Bibles, photographs, slides, old films, that kind of thing. But the mission of archival preservation is very, very different from that of the museum profession. See, museums want to preserve finite items to make them infinite. When my husband makes balloon animals for my son, we always tell him the same thing. James, all balloons pop. So then he's ready when it doesn't work out. At a museum, we try to make sure none of the balloons pop. We try to take things that will naturally break, fall apart, and decay, and we try to make them not break, fall apart, or decay. We try to make them last as long as possible so that we can learn all they have to teach us. Now, archives has a primary motivation of preservation so that they can preserve the information that the object provides rather than the object itself. So if my husband made a balloon animal for an archivist, the archivist would get out a tape measure, take all kinds of measurements, write down the color, brand, any wording on the balloon, note the materials the balloon is made out of, the name of the person who blew it up, take a picture, and pop it. Because they had all the information they needed about the balloon, so there's no reason to save the actual balloon. Let me put this in practical terms beyond balloon animals. During my second week as a research assistant, my supervisor gave me a family Bible that dated back to the late 1700s. She had me make a copy of the family birth, marriage, and death records written in the front, a copy of both covers and the title page. And then she handed me a scalpel. And she said, I need you to take this apart because we're going to throw away the cover and recycle the paper. And as a good museum student, I refused. Because I didn't take a vow like a doctor, but that's causing intentional harm to an artifact. But as far as the archives were concerned, we had all the information that we needed from the object, so there's no need to save the actual object. And if you think about it, this process really saves space, and it's easier for outside researchers to find what they're looking for. But do you see how these two methods kind of work together and against each other at the same time? It was very confusing. But I love working in archives. I completed all of my coursework to become a certified archivist, but I don't have enough hours in the field to sit for the certification exam. So someday, maybe when the kids are in school, I'll be able to take the exam. I'm not certified yet, but I'm close. Now, how does all of this land on historic houses? My master's thesis was called One for the Books. It was a case study of the interpretation of personal libraries in historic house museums. And the historic houses that I focused on were George Washington's Mount Vernon, Thomas Jefferson's Monticello, and James Madison's Montpelier. So the focus of my thesis was how much attention do historic house museums give to the library when those libraries were built at a time in history when books are so incredibly important. In the 1700s, books were the socially equivalent of a Gucci bag or 1 million likes on Twitter. If you're at all interested in how things like books, furniture, or architecture becomes these glaring signposts for movement across the social strata of colonial America, I really recommend Richard Bushman's The Refinement of America. It's just fascinating how they gauged people's worth and their popularity based on the books that they owned. Anyway, I focused on how much of the scholarly knowledge that we have about the personal libraries of Washington, Jefferson, and Madison was trickling down into visitor experiences in the historic houses. I was asking their curators questions like, are the tour guides giving the rich literary history of these spaces on their tours? Does the signage and the history panels explain the significance of the libraries, or are the libraries just quick walking shortcuts to get from George Washington's bedroom to his parlor? Because all three of these men shared architectural plans and architects with each other when they built their libraries. All three of them connected their libraries to their main bedchamber, and George Washington shaved in his library. That's how personal and intimate these spaces were. And I wanted to know if that was something visitors were learning when they went to the historic house, or if all of those spaces were just getting passed over for something more flashy, more sexy, like the pillars or the slave staircase in the back of the kitchen. And if you want to know the answers to those questions, you can read my thesis. So now you know more than you ever wanted to know about me and why I love talking about historic houses. Let's move on to the next part of the presentation, which is about historic house preservation in America. Americans in general, we love our stuff. We're very excited about memories and meaning. I mentioned memories and meaning earlier. We humans like our memories. We like to hold on to things that mean something to us. More importantly, we like to try to freeze them in time so that they never change, as if letting them change would somehow diminish their significance to us. The first big preservation effort in our country, anybody know? Was to save Independence Hall from falling down in 1816. Anybody know the first nationwide preservation effort to preserve a historic house? It was George Washington's Mount Vernon. Mount Vernon was empty and falling apart, so the Mount Vernon Ladies Association was founded in 1853 to save it. That name tastes like acid in my mouth because they didn't do a good job. More information on that in my thesis. Anyway, this is America. We like to keep we like to hold on to things and keep them cool. So in the early 1900s, we established the National Park Service, the National Historic Landmarks, and the National Heritage Areas. Some of the wealthier folks in our nation's history start giving money to preserve all kinds of things because preserving American history becomes trendy. John D. Rockefeller built up Colonial Williamsburg in Virginia. Henry Ford established a huge preservation project called Greenfield Village in 1929 in Dearborn, Michigan. And I'm going to mention that preservation abomination later. Charleston, South Carolina, the French Quarter in New Orleans, San Antonio, Texas, all of these little pockets of history start getting necessary and legal protection in the 1930s and 1940s. Here's one I'll mention a lot tonight actually, is the Historic American Building Survey. It gets established in 1933. This was the first federal program to document historic structures, and if you want to start anywhere to know anything about your historic house, the first place you should look is to see if it's in the Historic American Building Survey. So up until the 1960s, there's two sectors that are trying to preserve the memories and meaningful places in America. There's the private sector, like the Mount Vernon Ladies Association, the DAR, your local churches, universities, and American Legion and VFW halls. They are local folks who just want to make sure that their local history gets preserved. And they have to fundraise on their own. So they have to have a big catch, right? Like George Washington slept here. Or the Union General at Gettysburg couldn't sleep the night before, so he visited this tavern. You have to have something that draws people in to participate. And then you've got the public sector, the Park Service and all the departments under it, which is focused on preserving landscapes, special features like Niagara Falls or Mesa Verde, and the parks like Yellowstone or the Badlands. And in 1966, the National Register for Historic Places gets established. And the Register and the National Trust for Historic Preservation very quickly become the main points of connection that link private preservation efforts with the federal government and the National Park Service. They provide a ridiculous amount of resources, millions of dollars in grants, they're an advocate agency to Congress, and oorah, they work with the Justice Department to make sure that historic buildings meet ADA requirements. So when we start talking about historic preservationists focusing on historic houses, we kind of secretly love the National Trust. They're one of our favorites. I would argue that one of the best things the National Trust and the National Register for Historic Places did is they said, whoa guys, calm down. We cannot preserve every house everywhere. So, what exactly is the historic significance of this place, or this landscape, or this building? Why does it matter? That's an important question. And this is where it gets fun, because history nerds like me get to argue about how we determine the historical significance of a house or object. Remember, meaning and memory? They are not objective. They are deeply, deeply subjective, and people have argued for hours on the internet about what's important and what's worth remembering. Whenever my graduate cohort at Baylor got into a historical significance debate, somebody, usually me, would always mention this guy. I told my college interview entrance interview team that I wanted to study history so I could be Indiana Jones. And they let me in anyway. And one of his best one-liners is, "That belongs in a museum." Let me assure you, so very, very often things really don't belong in a museum. I mentioned earlier a cliche about the George Washington slept here approach. And if we made a museum out of every room and every house and every bed that George Washington may or may not have slept in, we would not have room for more important things like Dutch Brothers.
Oh.
We just wouldn't. Let me give you an example of a real historical significance debate I had while I worked at the Texas Collection. As I mentioned before, the Texas Collection is at Baylor. It houses one of the largest archival collections of Texas history in the country. Everything from Davy Crockett's diary, to Civil War letters, to the tiny cassette tapes of the FBI talking to David Koresh. We had it. And somebody came in one day, this nice lady came in and handed me 3 large banker's boxes full of every Valentine card that her grandmother had ever received. They were beautiful. And she wanted to donate them to our collection. Now, first of all, museums and archives don't have to take everything that you bring them. They have mission statements and acceptance policies and all kinds of things in place so that they don't have to just accept everybody's Valentine's cards. And the Texas collection was very particular about being a repository for Texas history. And this woman was convinced that she had a real piece of essential Texas history. And it was so essential that the only way she would donate them was if we agreed to have them on permanent display. Right next to the blood-stained Bible that they found at the Alamo. Like, not really, but like you get my point. So she wanted these Valentines on permanent display. And as kindly as I could, I asked, ma'am, how would you say these Valentines reflect and share the essential history of Texas? And she said, well, obviously, they show how Valentines have changed over time. Unfortunately for her, that was not a good enough reason for us to take them, and she had some not nice things to say to me before she took them away. But that was what I took back to my museum friends and shared with them, is not everything belongs in a museum. So the National Register for Historic Places and the National Trust have established a rubric for determining the historical significance of historic properties. So this is brass tacks. If you want to start writing the story of your historic house, start with these questions. It's okay if you don't have all the answers, but these are a good place to start. First, right out the gate, it's got to be old. Does anybody know how old a structure has to be before it is considered historic? Frank, how old? What do you think?
Under normal circumstances, I would have said 100 years.
That's what I thought. It's 50.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
50 years. Some say that's too young, some say that's too old, but that's the line that the National Trust drew. It's 50 years. And here are the 4 criteria that a proposed property must meet according to the National Register's criteria for evaluation. Not criteria for acceptance, criteria for evaluation to be listed in the National Register. Now again, keep in mind, this is not a criteria for evaluating how important a building is to the owner, or to the owner's slaves, or to the owner's great-great-grandchildren. But these are a place to start if you're trying to put into words and into a story the historical significance of your home. Number 1, the property is associated with events that have made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of American history. Number 2, the property is associated with the life of a significant person in the American past. Number 3, the property embodies distinctive features of a type period, method of construction, or highly artistic values, or represents a significant and distinguishable entity whose components may lack individual distinction. That's a long, windy way of saying style. It's got to have some kind of stylistic intrigue. And number 4, the property and its site yield or are likely to yield important information in history or prehistory. Now, sometimes a property will fit more than one of these. Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., where President Lincoln was assassinated. That's an important event, and it's an important person. The Statue of Liberty. That's basically all of number 3, but if someone who helped build it left some workers' union-related graffiti written on it, that's a good case for it to also qualify for number 4. I'm also going to show you a tool that we like to call a significance thermometer. So the first item at the bottom, age, right out the gate, got to be 50 years. Once you've ticked off the 50-year rule, the significance of the structure goes up if there are particular style factors, like I mentioned. Windows or staircases, what kind of roof it has, those are signposts for historical significance. An example of unique style is if it's the only house built at that time with a curved staircase and all the rest are straight, or if the windows are double paned and every other house on the block is single paned. Fun fact, our house was built in 2012, and it's the only house in our area of Turner where the laundry is inside, not in the garage. That doesn't count as stylistically significant, but that's the best thing I could come up with. Okay. Next, an unaltered structure is very important. If you inherit your great-grandmother's house and then you put a brand new front porch on it, that lowers the historical significance of the house. It doesn't lower the importance of the house. It doesn't remove the meaning of the house or invalidate the memories that you had there as a kid. It just creates a barrier towards future generations fully appreciating its structural place in history. Unless, for your family records, you put a picture of the old house without the porch next to a picture of the house with the porch. Sometimes that's all we're talking about when we say preserving the story. It can be that easy. You can retain some, very little, but you can retain some of the historical significance of your house simply by taking pictures. The last one is a catch-all term. Is it historical? We overuse that word. Is it historically prominent? That is the standard. Somebody did something cool here. Reason for preserving a building. It could be George Washington. It could be Elvis. It could be the spot of a massacre. It could be the place of a battle or a revival, whatever. There are, however, a few things that a building cannot be if it wants to be on the register. Believe it or not, the National Register has established a criteria for exclusion from the register. These are places we can just say right out the gate, they're not getting in. Doesn't mean they're not important, just means they're not getting in. This is not an all-inclusive list, but it is some of the big ones. Birthplaces and cemeteries. Unless the birthplace is the only thing we have left of a person, their birthplace alone isn't going to designate it. Because everybody has a birthplace. Literally, everybody has a birthplace. Religious properties. You have to have what we call religious status plus, which means religious status plus great architecture. Or religious status plus it was the last place that Billy Graham ever spoke publicly. He's better at it than I am. If you want to apply to be a church on the National Register, just because you're old, there's old churches everywhere. So you got to have religious status plus to qualify. And moved structures. Yeah, if you move it, it's out. I mentioned Henry Ford built up Greenfield Village in Dearborn, Michigan, and it is an American history theme park. There are rides, not just carriage rides, roller coasters. There are rides, restaurants, tours, gift shops, over 80 acres of historic houses, workshops, including Thomas Edison's actual workshop, working farms, railroad junctions, all kinds of historic structures. And they have all been moved there from somewhere else. None of them are resting on their original foundation. Guys, I'm getting chills. Like that is my nightmare as a museum professional. They have all been moved there from somewhere else. And apparently the National Register doesn't like that either, because if you move a structure, it can't qualify. Fun fact, you can actually get de-designated from the National Register. If you suddenly cease to meet the criteria, like if somebody opens a lockbox in Aunt Pearl's attic and there's a receipt proving that Andrew Jackson didn't carve your winding banister by hand, then you can get removed from the list. Or if you botch the renovation job, which is what happened here. Does anybody know where this is? Karen, you're looking like you know where it is.
That's okay.
Oh, okay. It's Soldier Field. Chicago Bears in Chicago. It was built in 1924, and it was one of the most iconic architectural landmarks in the city. This facade is just beautiful. It's absolutely stunning. But in 2003, they renovated the field and added a ton of new seating. Do I have a pointer? Ooh, I don't have a pointer. Never mind. They added a ton of new seating that completely covered the original seating on the inside, and the exterior that they put behind that historical facade was so big and flashy that it totally detracted from the scene. It's sad. It's just really sad. It made the historical facade stick out like a sore thumb, so the Historic Landmarks Advisory Board de-designated it. It's still fun to go watch the Bears play, but it doesn't look quite as nice from the outside. I want to reiterate that these are just some simple tools that owners of historic houses can use if they want to start asking questions about where on the scale of historical significance is my house. It's older than Crawford Crossing, but it's not as old as the State Library. Maybe it has a really cool stained glass window that your great-great-granddaddy brought over on a covered wagon from Nashville. That's cool. But if they had to replace the window when a baseball went through it in the 80s, and now the pieces are in the attic, that's an important thing to include in your historical structure records. Otherwise, that bit of history is going to get lost. Now, I realize up until now, I've been throwing a lot of rules and criteria at you. At this point in the seminar, I would like to, what am I reading? Yep. Move into how we actually do the preservation. Because I don't want to just tell you how to look at a house and say this house is important, that house is not, and here's how to tell the difference. I hope that whether you live in a historic house or whether you're just a history junkie, that I can give you the tools to look at a piece of history and say, why is this important? And what can we do? What should we do? Or what should we not do? So, First thing about preserving a historic building, you have to get your motives and your goals figured out. If you're going to start a plan for your historic house, it's important you know which of these 4 methods you're going to use. The first is preservation, which technically means sustaining the existing form, integrity, and materials of a historic building. The example that I list there is using original materials on a new roof. If your great-granddaddy built a 1-story brick house with an outhouse in the back, and your goal is preservation, that means that when there's a hole in the wall, you use bricks that are the same size, color, and material to fix the hole and not sheetrock. And if somebody wants to move in, you don't add a 2nd story or a bathroom. That's if your goal is preservation. Next is renovation, significantly updating a building for current use. And the example I listed was Soldier Field in Chicago. This approach can disregard historically significant components, and that's okay sometimes. Soldier Field looks awful to me, but they really needed more seats, and they really needed more bathrooms. And sometimes it's just what you have to do if the building is primarily functional and you want to keep using it. Next is restoration, returning a building to its condition at a specific time period. This one's my favorite. The examples I list here are the Montpelier Estate and the Lincoln Historic District in Springfield, Illinois. Montpelier was a part of my thesis, so bear with me. I'm going to get real nerdy for just a minute. The Montpelier Estate was James Madison's home in Virginia after he retired from Congress, and the original structure was pretty small. He basically built an add-on to his parents' house, which was originally built about 1760. Then James got elected president, and he made at least 2 more significant additions to the house before he died. After he died, his son completely destroyed the family legacy with exorbitant spending, and the estate was sold and resold until William DuPont bought it and drastically renovated and enlarged it in 1901. This is the DuPont family of American horse racing fame. Check this out. So the top photo is James Madison Sr.'s house, built in 1760. After retiring from Congress, James and Dolly added the giant portico on the front, and when he was president, he added the extra wings out on both sides. The bottom photo is the DuPont family residence at the height of its pink plaster Art Deco glory. If you think the outside looks different, the inside got completely gutted and all switched around, like someone took a giant snow globe and just shook it up and changed all the rooms. They redecorated it. It became this hallmark 1920s Art Deco house right out of a Fitzgerald novel. It was full of visitors and trophies, and it probably smelled like horses. And the reason I'm telling you all this is because eventually one of the DuPonts gifted the house to the National Trust with the condition that it be restored to its Madison-era structure. And they did it. It took years of work and research, but they knocked down walls, they ripped up carpet, they demolished the roof, they stripped the giant house down to its bare bones so that now, when you visit Montpelier, it looks like this. I would say absolutely the greatest case study for historic restoration in our country's history. Hands down. You can read a lot about that online. Now, the Lincoln Historic District in Springfield, Illinois was not quite this drastic, but what they did was very similar. They pared down several large structures to find the bare bones buildings, but they restored an entire district. That's about 4 city blocks that surround the Lincoln home in Springfield. And they reduced all of these buildings down to the same structures that they would have been when Lincoln lived there, right up until his first presidency. And now those houses are owned and operated by the National Park Service. I'm really good friends with the curator there. And one of the things they decided to do when that's a lot of real estate. You've got these 2- and 3-story houses that you're gutting down to a 2- and 3-room space. They decided to appeal to the city to get them commercially zoned. So now those are rented out to lawyers and accountants and other local businesses. It's actually a really good setup. So that's restoration. Now, rehabilitation, preserving portions and features that convey historical, cultural, and architectural values while making the building compatible with current function. The key word here is adaptive use. You're keeping the important historical stuff, but you're making some changes, sometimes significant changes. The 2 examples I have for this method are local. The Turnaround Cafe. Used to be a couple different things, but if you go in there now, it's very obvious that it was a A bank, because they have kept parts of the historic structure prominent, and they make it really easy for you to tell what it used to be. That building is never going on the National Register, because the surest way to lower the historic integrity of a building is to add a commercial kitchen. But that's not what she wants to use it for. She wants to use it for a restaurant, and I love it. I think a lot of people look at old structures and say, we should preserve that. And what they actually want to do, or what they should do, is rehabilitate it. Keep the cool stuff, make it useful, especially if you can make it useful in a way that maintains the original spirit and intent of the building. The turnaround isn't a bank anymore, but it is still a thriving social center in our town. Now, I hope some of you have driven by the giant white tabernacle across town, the giant, glorious, beautiful building operated by the Northwest Christian Network. I am part of a small but mighty committee over there called the Tabernacle Rehabilitation Committee. The tabernacle was built without any nails. It was entirely notch and peg in the 1890s, and for all intents and purposes, very little has changed on the inside. There have been some walls added, electric, and bathrooms eventually. These days, our committee is working on a plan to update some of the structural components of the building, but we're keeping it as original as possible. Trying to update ADA bathrooms and ramps, making sure that it's got fresh paint and the roof is taken care of. However, that building was originally constructed to house, I meant to ask you before the presentation, I didn't. How many people used to come for the convention?
I remember.
5,000?
Yeah, 3,000 or 4,000.
3,000 to 5,000 people who traveled to Turner every summer for the Oregon Christian Convention for the last 170 years. My husband and I just presided over the 171st convention on that property this summer. It is a place built for gathering, preaching, and worship. And if we're going to keep doing that, we need carpet and not sawdust. We need indoor plumbing. We need electricity for sound amplification. And we need fans because convention is in June and it gets hot. Now, adding things like fans and AV management sounds like it's taking away from the historic intent of the building, because it is. But those changes are actually sustaining the original purpose of the building, because they are ensuring that the convention can continue doing what it built that building to do. Does that make sense? Great. Now, once you have decided for your purposes which of these routes you're going to pursue, you can start collecting historical information about your house. And structural records will take you far. Things like the title or the deed, the blueprints, measured drawings, and plot maps. These will be huge contributors to your portfolio as you gather information about your house. We actually have what I call a paper trail hound on our board. I will identify him later. The David Rumsey map collection offered by Stanford University is quite extensive and way more maps than you will ever need in your life, but it can be very helpful. The Sanborn fire insurance maps. Oh man, sometimes if you've got nothing else on your building, you can find a Sanborn fire map on it. The Sanborn Insurance Company has published very accurate, very detailed maps of city street layouts and existing buildings in about 12,000 US cities from the mid-1800s to the present day. And a lot of them are accessible digitally through the Library of Congress. You can find out building size, type of construction, condition and use, and sometimes an indication of how far from a water source the building is. The really well-preserved ones are color-coded: yellow for wood frame construction, pink for brick, blue for stone, etc. You can also sometimes tell what the roofing style is, window placement, wall thickness. Just to show you how incredible the Library of Congress is, here's a Sanborn fire insurance map of the city of Turner, Oregon from December 1898. It's kind of hard to see on the slide, but the writing is very clear. You can zoom in real far on the Library of Congress website. They list every city in Oregon alphabetically, and they have 4 maps for Turner. This one from March 1913, February 1921, and May 1931. So that's 3rd Street, right? So the fire department ought to be, right? Like just off the top of that map, where we are. Here's the one from May 1931. You can just, yeah, you can't see the notes they've made, but you can see them well on the website. The blue shop, can everybody see the blue? There's a pink, and then a tan, and then a blue.
Yes.
Straight above my finger. The blue shop here, it's labeled cigar shop. How fast do you think that's going to go up? Blue means it's made out of concrete. Next door is a wooden structure labeled drugs. And in big bold letters it says oils and paints. So they know what they're dealing with if there's ever a fire. Next is the bank. And it's pink. So you know that it's made out of brick. There's also another large pink structure over here.
Oh, okay.
Labeled garage, with notes that it has a concrete floor with brick posts. The blue garage right next door to it is built with concrete, but there's all kinds of notes scribbled onto that little square. Says that it has electric lights, a stove for heat, a concrete floor with 15 cars on it, and 3 rows of wooden posts. Do you know what that building is?
That's a lot.
Is that the Ball Brothers garage?
Yeah, probably.
And just for fun, on the crest right here, someone scribbled a bunch of notes about what the fire department has to offer. Because the fire insurance company needs to know what kind of trucks the fire department has. It says prevailing winds, northwest in summer, southwest in winter, water facilities, no steam and no hand engine, 1 independent hose cart, no hook and ladder truck. All kinds of fun things on these maps. Back to the structural records. These are so easy to digitize now. You can find these and you can keep them in a folder or in a binder or in a safe in your house, but it is so easy anymore to just take a picture with your phone or to scan it. In fact, if I could summarize about 50% of my master's degree, it's this. Water is the enemy. If there's any way you can store the things that you're keeping that have meaning and memories for you away from water, do it. Digital archives are not just important right now because they can last so much longer than print materials. They preserve the valuable information on the item without doing nearly as much harm to the item. It's also never been cheaper or easier to store archival records online. So one of the most basic things I tell people about preserving your home and its history is to take pictures. It's fine if they're just on your phone. If you see anything that you think might be significant, take a picture of it. And that doesn't just go for the house. Take pictures of your quilts. Take pictures of your granddad's toy tractor. My mom collects Christmas ornaments, and I made her this little catalog system with pictures of each one and a little label of where she got it and who gave it to her. You don't have to get that serious, but at least take a picture. Print a copy, put a copy in a flash drive or in the cloud, preferably both. But for the love of Pete, put a date.
Amen.
Or a name, something on that picture. I have boxes and boxes of pictures in our collection storage for Yesterday in Turner of pictures that all say the same thing, FIC. It stands for Found in Collection. Because I have no idea who's in the picture. I don't know who gave us the picture. I don't know when it was taken. I don't even know if it was taken in Marion County. If you don't put a name or a date or a location on your photographs, they're historically useless. It's sad, but it's true. Now here's the thing. As you gather these kinds of documents about your house, if you want a safe place to store them, that's what I'm here for. I'm sure you all have great stories. To be honest, I'm not actually here to hear and listen to all the great stories. I'm here to help you make sure that your house doesn't fall down and make sure that the records don't get lost or rained on. So for the next part of this presentation, this is my last bit, I'm going to share with you some really easy access resources to help you create your own preservation plan for your historic house. Getting started can be the hardest part, but if you have the resources to start asking the right questions, it can be a lot of fun. Everyone who's ever asked me, how do I preserve X in my historic structure, I tell them you need to go to the Secretary of Interior Standards for the Treatment of Historic Properties. The most recent publication came out in 2017, and it's constantly getting updated. Not only do they have an entire online historic preservation library that you can access for free, they have the greatest online resource for caring specifically for historic properties. So if you're working on the roof and the staircase and the windows, they can help you manage all 3 of those things. They include very detailed guidelines for preserving, rehabilitating, restoring, and reconstructing historic buildings. Remember the different definition of those we talked about. These are separate guidelines for doing all of those different projects. Here's just a screenshot of their webpage, right? So over here, you got standards for rehabilitation, standards for restoration, standards for reconstruction. Planning successful rehabilitation projects. There's a tab right there that says Rehabilitation Standards Tax Credit Projects. Yeah. Don't miss that. Because everything that you can glean from the Secretary of Interior's criteria fits what you need for preservation tax incentives. So if you're serious about preserving a historic building, this can be a really easy one-stop shop. How many of y'all are on Pinterest? Thank you. So you know what I mean when you can go down the rabbit hole. You can find all kinds of things on this website. They have super specific web pages for preserving structures, different kinds of roofs, windows, doors, all of it. This is just the windows. Evaluating historic windows for repair or replacement, documentation requirements for proposed window replacement, replacement windows where no historic windows remain, and evaluating tinted and reflective glazing. I don't know anything about that, but if you want to know anything about windows, they'll give you everything you need to know. There's stuff for awnings and porches and doorways, buildings that are falling down, buildings that have been added to. They also have case studies. If you need some light reading of other preservation projects or restoration projects, you can go down the rabbit hole on that. Next, after the Secretary of Interior, I tell people to go to Historic American Building Survey. I mentioned them earlier. The National Park Service's digital records for Historic American Building Survey and the Historic American Engineering Record are the largest and most heavily used records in the Prints and Photographs Division of the Library of Congress. So back in 2000, they also added the Historic American Landscape Survey, and they have a huge digital treasure trove of photographs, architectural drawings, maps, landscape development records, and even blueprints. Here's their webpage. I don't know about you, but I would love to make wallpaper out of all those measured drawings. I love them, and I could stare at them forever. Anybody know where this is from? It's Multnomah Falls.
Yeah.
It's a stereograph card from the U.S. Geological File from 1905. So if you go down the rabbit hole, you can find some pretty cool stuff. I don't want to forget about the Sanborn fire maps and the Dave Rumsey map collection. Those are great. But let's say there is no existing documentation for your historic house yet. You can get it with companies like TechRender. TechRender uses the latest 3D scanning and modeling technology for historic structural records. I'm just going to read right off their website. They're headquartered in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and they provide services nationwide. Leveraging ongoing collaboration with academic research, TechRender utilizes state-of-the-art 3D LiDAR scanning equipment, 3D CAD modeling, and proprietary software interfaces to produce highly accurate building documentation cost-effectively to its clients. Basically, if you want to find measured blueprints, 3D models, both print and digital, all the things that I just told you you could try to find on HABs, they can make those for you. Very useful when applying for grants and tax incentives. And if they even have a little get a quote button, all you have to do is submit a little information about your house and some of the pictures of the outside, and bam, you can get a quote on a structure scan. Now, if that's just a little out of your budget, or way out of your budget, we have provided for you a historic structure report. These are really simple. They're really easy to fill out and keep in your personal records. And if there's photos to go with them, even better. When it comes to preserving your historic house, the single most important thing you can create is a paper trail of what it has been and what it currently is. Finally, another one-stop shop that is my personal secret weapon is preservationdirectory.com. If I can't find it on the Secretary of Interior website, this is where I go. They are a one-stop shop for preservation events, conferences, grants, products, services, and step-by-step preservation instructions and resources sorted by building and organizational type, and an online library of articles, regulations, and policies. This is their main website. You can see all the main offerings over here: historic real estate, museums, preservation library, grants and funding, press release and job postings. Anybody else want to work in museums? Historic photo galleries, historic tours, inns, B&Bs, and hotels. But what I want to mainly draw your attention to is this place where it says, click on a category below to view preservation resources in that category. I only listed the first three. They're advertising, African American history, and then comes archaeology and architecture. And that list is long. Bear with me. figured it was easier to just read it than have you try to read it on a tiny screen. Archives, auto history and restoration, barns, bridges, cemeteries and gravestone restoration, churches, circus and sideshow history, diners, drive-in theaters, endangered history, film history, forest fire lookout towers, gardens, green building and sustainable preservation practices, historic speeches and oral history, lighthouses, maps, maritime history, military history with subheadings for major wars and conflicts, music history, Native American history, neon signs, political history, railroad history, rural and agricultural history, skyscraper statues, technology, television, toys and games, urban studies, vaudeville, Wild West history, and women's rights history. If you click on any one of those, there will be even more websites, more articles, more contact information for other professionals who know way more than me about how to preserve these particular areas of history. This is my little secret resource. I'm only sharing it with you. You're welcome. Speaking of sharing, I want to wrap up my presentation this evening with what I hope is your biggest takeaway from this event, and that is that Yesterday in Turner is here to help. You don't have to try to preserve your historic house on your own. Our mission statement is quite literally to preserve and share the history of Turner. So if you have family histories you're collecting, or scrapbooks, or your great-grandmother's diary, or like we're talking about today, historic structure reports that you want preserved and kept safe, we are here to help and we can make that happen. It might not be storing them for you. It might just be helping you find the best storage methods that fit your resources and your budget, but either way we can help, and here's how. First and foremost, our board doesn't know everything about Turner, but we do have over 100 years of Turner residency represented on the board. So we do know some things. And I'm going to name our giant know-it-all on the board. That's Dave Bonnick, our project manager. I mentioned him earlier when I was talking about tracking down deeds and land use records because he is an absolute paper trail hound when it comes to structural records and finding out where things come from. Next, Yesterday in Turner has so much history of the Turner area in our collection, including maps, photos, local histories that other people have written. And as the collections manager, I'm working on an ongoing project to process that collection. Basically, that means to get it sorted and as organized as possible so that it can be as accessible as possible. Most historical societies dream of someday having a museum, and that's nice. We do dream of that. But we also dream of being accessible to the community, so that we can help all of you with your historic research. Next, we have partnered with the City of Turner Public Works to get a secure collection storage unit for all of our collections. That's ongoing. We had all of our items in the Ball Brothers garage, but when they started renovation, we had to move it out, and Turner Public Works lets us use a storage unit on their property right now. We also have some larger items in a storage space over in Almsville that the Almsville Historical Society lets us use because they're awesome. As collections manager, I monitor our storage unit pretty regularly, and I'm currently working on a wish list of things that we can use to help keep our collection safe and dry. So if you have a family history or a historic structure history that you would like us to hold in trust for you, please reach out to me. Our storage unit is not super accessible. It's actually really crowded in there, but I would love to work out a loan agreement to help keep your historic house projects safe if that is helpful to you. That being said, here's the nonprofit spiel. We're a nonprofit and everything we do is funded by donations. So there is a donation jar in the back. If you would like to give to the cause of preserving tangible Turner history, like family histories and photographs and some of the objects that we have displayed in the back, we would really appreciate your help, and your donations are tax deductible. And finally, networking opportunities like this event tonight. We are all here because we love Turner, we love old stuff in Turner, and Yesterday in Turner would love to continue hosting events like this for all of you and all of us to get together and brainstorm and connect and find great ways to continue sharing Turner history. Here's a couple of things coming down the pipeline for Yesterday in Turner. November 10th and 11th, we will have an informational table at the Country Mouse Bazaar at the Oregon Christian Camp and Retreat Center. Come say hi. We'll have some stuff laid out. I hear there's going to be some freebies, maybe, that Adeline might have out for us. I'm wearing custom-made Yesterday in Turner earrings for my presentation tonight. We might have some more of those. In spring 2024, we will have our first ever pop-up museum featuring artifacts from Turner residents, and those who bring artifacts will have the opportunity to give a 90-second show and tell spiel. This is one of the ways we want to see what the folks in Turner have to share their own history with us. If you don't follow us on Facebook yet, please consider it. We'll be posting more information about our events, our ongoing projects, and Dave and I are working on sharing some of our archival materials on the Facebook page. If you have any other interest in furthering your education or looking at more books about historic preservation, Historic Preservation by Norman Tyler is the historic preservation Bible. This was my entire master's degree. It's just this. The Back of the Big House by John Michael Flatch was an absolutely revolutionary text that came out, it's probably been several years ago now, but it focuses on historic preservation and interpretation of plantation homes. Not so many of those in the PNW as there are in Texas, but it's still fascinating. And then Interpreting Historic House Museums by Jessica Foy Donnelly is also really helpful. And if any of you nerds have any interest in a master's thesis about libraries and historic houses in colonial America, shoot me an email, I'll send you a copy, but don't come back to me with all of the spelling and grammar errors. This is the point where I would say thank you for coming, you've all been wonderful, and I can't wait to do this again, but I really would like to open it up for questions if we have time. I did that in less than an hour. Yay. Does anybody have any questions? You'll notice that Dave is operating a camera. So this is we are filming this and it is going to be available on our Facebook page if you want to share it or go back and watch anything else.
What's the oldest house that you're aware of in Turner?
Oh, I'm not the person to ask. I've only lived here 5 years. That I'm aware of in Turner? I don't know. Dave, what's the oldest house in Turner?
There's one that I'm working with. It's on a W.B. Fraser property that was built, we don't know for sure, about 1839, 1837. The structure is still there, but it's encased with additions.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And we
Yeah.
don't know for sure if it was that. The rumor is that it was built by a trapper and abandoned, and then it was taken over by W.B. Fraser when he moved there in the 1850s.
Thank you. Thank you.
And another home is on Stage Lane Road, which is an old home. That was built in, I think, about 1852, somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the Delaney House,
That's the one I was thinking was the Delaney house.
and that has been restored, and it is on the historic register.
I thought that one was.
Yes,
And
It's-
McKinney's out on 70th,
yes,
the red brick house.
yes,
Mm-hmm.
52, somewhere in there. And that is a unique house. The bricks, it's 3 bricks thick.
Oh, okay.
It went through a fire and survived. Everything inside was burned, but they have restored that. It's owned by Ray Pelletier now.
That's right. Thank you, Dave. Any other questions?
Well, I like going to that little place in Dearborn.
Do you?
Yes.
You know what? I've never been there.
It is fascinating.
It's so interesting knowing some of the backstories of museums and historic houses. They can be so much fun. They can be so much
It
fun.
was fascinating.
Yeah, and there's a lot of education and there's a lot of great history there. But it still sometimes, makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck.
I didn't have to travel all over the United States to see so much.
Mm-hmm. But it's all in one place.
Yep.
Right.
You want to mention the possibility of volunteering with you?
You have the opportunity to volunteer with you. We actually do have a volunteer coordinator. We don't have too many volunteers right now because we're still working on what our ongoing projects are going to look like. We'd like to keep doing events like this. We'd like to keep doing pop-up museums. But Jamie Matheson has agreed to be our volunteer coordinator as we continue to try to expand our offerings. And as we expand our offerings, we'll need more people. So if you're interested, please leave us your information. Please fill out the Preserving Our Houses comment sheet so that we can
Evaluation.
keep doing this.
It was lovely.
Okay, eat cookies, talk. Thanks for coming. It was really great to
Very
share this
lovely.
with you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.